everybody. It is Matt and Jennifer Lucas with the Franchising Company back for another edition of our Zoom series, except for today, it's a
Today's different.
little bit different. So instead of us interviewing a franchise, we have Megan with FranFund here to talk to us all things SBA and 401k rollovers. So
Funding. All kinds
funding,
of
all
funding
kinds of funding
options.
options. I'm sorry, did I say that wrong?
Mhm.
But Megan, thank you so much for joining us. If you want, just briefly introduce yourself and yeah, we'll jump into some things.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me. So I am Megan Butera. I am a funding consultant here at FranFund. Like Matt mentioned, here at FranFund, we kind of do it all from the rollover strategy to SBA lending. We do like to take an educational approach, so we don't leave you feeling like you didn't leave the conversation with some kind of avenue to go for funding.
Yeah, so thanks for that. And I'll share with everybody that FranFund has been a very great partner for Jennifer and I and all of our candidates that we have helped put into franchise ownership over the last 10 and a half plus years. So we certainly appreciate all the assistance that you guys continue to provide to our candidates. And as you said, education into the different, products. So let's jump right into it. Clearly one of the most, I would say, most often used is the SBA, right? So let's jump into that first, and then we'll touch base on the rollover process as well.
Yeah, for sure. So with SBA lending, a few key things that the SBA looks for is first they'll look at credit score. So they like to see a minimum credit score of 680. If it is 700 or above, even better, but 680 is minimum. Banks typically like to see that you have not had any bankruptcies, foreclosures, or short sales in your credit history within the past 5 years. And then they also take a look at personal credit card debt. So if you do have any balances that carry over from month to month, they typically like to see that balance to be below $10,000. Um, After looking at that criteria, banks will take a look at liquidity. Because you do have to have a cash injection for the SBA loan. It does range anywhere from 10 to 20% cash injection, but 20% is really that sweet spot for most banks and lenders. That cash injection will be going towards like paying your franchise fee, getting your franchise agreement executed. So it'll be going towards the business. And then in terms of liquidity, banks will take a look at a few things. They will look at, checking and savings as well as non-retirement investments. So a brokerage account, stocks, bonds, mutual funds. There are other ways to find that liquid cash. Like if you own a home, we can always discuss a HELOC and how that looks. You could also utilize the rollover strategy with an SBA loan. So there are different avenues to get that cash injection.
Yeah, so let's take a brief pause there and kind of talk through that a little bit because I think that's something worth pointing out is that, liquidity is not just what you have sitting in your checking account. To your point, if you've got a brokerage account, stocks, crypto, I mean, these are all liquid accounts that you can use for the cash injection requirement of the SBA. But I think it's really important to note that you can actually use a HELOC for that cash injection, correct? So a home equity line of credit.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So, if you do, we don't do a HELOC in-house at FranFund, but we will discuss it and we can help point you in the right direction. Because that will do two things. That will, one, show the banks you have more liquidity, and two, you could use that HELOC money to go towards that cash injection.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think that that's really important because, I get that question often. Um,
Mhm.
sometimes people are under the impression that they can't use a HELOC for the cash injection. So I'm glad you brought that up here so that it's out there.
Yeah.
Does it make a difference if they're employed still? I know some of our candidates are in transition and are no longer employed. Does that have a bearing on the loan procedure?
Not really, as long as they, meet that criteria and can show that liquidity, plus some. So banks usually want to see that candidates do have at least 10% of the loan amount still remaining in liquidity when all is said and done. So like they haven't completely depleted their personal savings. So as long as they have that liquidity for the SBA loan, being employed isn't really a huge factor.
So the other part that I wanted to touch on, you said a little bit earlier, is, with like credit card debt, right? And so, for everybody that's watching this video, before you run off and start paying down your credit cards to get below that 10,000, you need to get with Megan and her team, and they'll help put together a strategy that's going to be a winning formula for you to, be able to get approved for this SBA. So, you mentioned that earlier, and I just wanted to make sure that folks don't just run off and
Yes.
take some liquidity to dump on those credit cards, and then all of a sudden now we've got a liquidity issue.
Yeah, 100%. I get that question all the time too. When I'm going through the process, people are like, "Oh, it's like 5K over, but I can go pay that off now." And I'm like, "Hold on, like just keep that $10,000 figure in mind." In the process, you will have to talk to my lending specialist, who's the one who gets you pre-approved. So you guys will strategize which way to go about that, getting that credit card debt down and not just starting to like move funds all over the place.
And then what size loans will the SBA do?
Yeah, so SBA goes up to $5 million. So as long as you could pay that cash injection, you can get a loan for up to $5 million with the SBA. And the SBA does do rates a minimum loan for $100,000.
Okay. And typical SBA term is 10 years,
Yep.
unless real estate's involved, correct?
So yeah, so with SBA, you will get a 10-year term, which is very standard. There are no prepayment penalties. So you can always pay that loan off early if that makes sense for your business. In terms of liens on real estates and all that, if you do have a loan amount of $350,000 or below, banks are allowed to be flexible and not require a lien on your real estate or any other personal asset as collateral. But if you do hit that $350,000 threshold, there will be some kind of lien on your collateral.
That's another really good point to make. So anything under 350, a lien is not required by the SBA. So if a lien's being requested, that's the bank itself requesting that lien to be put on the real estate.
Yes.
Okay, so then that would give our viewers here knowledge that, they could shop around potentially to other banks to find one that would do it without the lien.
Yeah, yep. And that's something we help here at FranFund, our services. We have networked with banks all across the country that are actively writing loans for new business owners. So we'll be shopping that loan to multiple banks and lending institutions, and then we help them review and compare those term sheets and offer letters that come back.
Perfect.
And how long is the process typically for SBA funding?
Yeah, so if it's a service-based brand from start to finish, it takes anywhere from 45 to 60 days. If it is a brick and mortar, it'll take a little longer, so around 60 to 90 days.
Should the candidates talk to you prior to having an idea of which brand they want to go with so they can get started on this? What do you recommend?
Yeah, so we always say like sooner the better. Because I know, they talk to you guys guide them kind of what brands would make sense for them. So sometimes having that initial conversation with me, just so I can let you guys know kind of financially where they stand, what kind of brands they'd be approved for and what they wouldn't be for. But they can always go through that process with you guys first, talk about a few brands, and then come to me and kind of use that total startup cost as a threshold for talking purposes.
But and it doesn't hurt, right? So for you, for an individual to go through the pre-qualification process, by am remembering correctly, it's a soft pull on their credit, right? So it doesn't affect their credit rating at all. So to get started with you early, even before they know specifically which brand, it would be a good idea, because then they have an idea of the range they can be approved, and it's not going to affect their credit score, correct?
Correct. Yep. Going through the pre-approval process with us is completely free. There will be a soft credit pull, but nothing will hurt your credit score.
Okay. I feel like we've covered pretty much everything. I guess the one more question. So, if they're acquiring real estate with the business, the term for SBA goes beyond 10 years, correct?
Um, To help pay that lease, yeah, you know, if standard is 10 years, but the SBA does factor in that lease within the loan.
Okay. All right. So let's shift gears and talk through rollover strategies. So you brought it up, touched on it briefly, just that it can be used as the cash injection part of an SBA loan if needed. But let's just talk about the rollover as its own standalone, funding opportunity. So what is ROBS? What does ROBS stand for? And just talk to us a little bit about the program.
Yeah, so it's an IRS program. It is Rollover for Business Startup. The acronym is ROBS. So if you have $50,000 or more in a previous 401k from a previous employer or a traditional IRA, you can access that money without paying any income taxes or early withdrawal penalties as an investment to your business.
So I think the key part to that is it's got to be a prior employer 401k or IRA. So if you are currently employed, that 401k is not eligible until you terminate employment, correct?
Correct, until you receive the last paycheck from that employer.
Okay. And talk to us just a little bit about, so you said no income tax. There's also no early withdrawal
Mhm.
penalties for accessing those funds either, correct? Talk
Yep.
to us just a little bit about the ROBS. So you have to create a C corp, and basically
Yeah.
you're kind of buying stock in your own company, right? In essence.
Yeah. So, you know, like you mentioned, it does have to be a C corp, and that is because you're about to access these funds you have not yet paid any taxes on, and then you're going to put them into a business you have total control over. So the IRS likes to keep you and the business completely separate from a tax perspective, which is what you get through the C corp structure. But yeah, so say, you know, you have $100,000 you're going to invest into your business. FranFund here, you know, we'll create a new 401k profit sharing plan that will be sponsored by the C Corp, which is your business. So you as a W-2 employee has the ability to participate in the retirement plan and roll over those funds into it. So essentially what's going to happen is this $100,000 is going to get wire transferred out of your new retirement plan that we've created for you into the business bank account. And once the funds have landed in the business bank account, the corporation will then turn around and issue $100,000 shares of that C Corp stock to the new 401k plan. So think of it $1 per share. So really, when all is said and done, your business now has $100,000 in its bank account that you can now use for like literally any business expense, like pay a franchise fee, marketing, equipment, or even payroll for your employees, including yourself.
Okay.
And so there's no loan that way. So there's a lot of benefits.
There's no,
Yeah.
not traditional debt service, no.
Yeah. The rollover is a great avenue if you're qualified for it. I mean, I always say look at it as equity in your company versus a loan. No interest rates. You're not paying anyone back. Of course, you can pay yourself back if you'd like. But yeah, definitely a great strategy.
And so the profit through the business does when it goes back into the 401k, does that go back in tax free or pre-tax? I guess better way.
Pre-tax.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. And then how long does that process typically take?
Yeah, so with the rollover, it'll typically take us about 3 to 4 weeks to complete this process. So it is a quicker avenue than going the lending route.
Okay.
So I have a question about back to the employment question I had. Sometimes I will think that our candidates are not going to be able to get funding based on what they've told me, but you will say if they're still employed and they have a certain salary, that it should be fine. How does that all?
Well, so then that could also come into play with your unsecured lending programs that you guys offer, right? And so a lot of those are going to be based on income and credit score,
Okay.
correct?
Yeah, so like I mentioned at the start, I don't like leaving a candidate feeling like confused and like they didn't get anything from our conversation. So at FranFund we focus on rollover and SBA, but we also work very closely with a partner who can get a candidate approved for an unsecured credit loan. So if that's an option for them, I'm always happy to do that introduction email to go that unsecured route.
Okay.
Awesome. Anything that you feel like we didn't cover that would be important for someone that is starting their funding exploration to know?
Um, I would, something with the rollover strategy that I feel like I we don't touch on often, but we do have a program here called Safety Net, which if a candidate is, leaning towards the ROB strategy, wants to get that started, but hasn't gone to discovery day yet, um, you know, it's again, the program's called Safety Net. We can always start that rollover process for the candidate completely free to them. We can start rolling over the funds. We just won't create the C Corp yet or the new 401k plan. So then, when they come back from discovery, they're like, all right, I'm ready to move forward. It cuts that time in half. And it only takes about like 1 to 2 weeks to actually create the C Corp and get the funds in their business bank account.
Okay. And then if for some reason they decide they're not going to move forward, then you can just kind of revert everything back.
Correct. Yeah. Then we can roll everything back to where it originally came from.
Awesome. I did not know this. That is
Oh,
good
yes.
information. All right. Well, Megan, thank you so much for taking the time here and helping to educate us and our viewers. If you are interested in learning more about any of these programs, feel free to send me a text at 270-215-2844, and I will get you connected with Megan.
Thank you, Megan.
Yeah, thank you for
Great day.
having me.
Talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye.